Jeena Cho holds a JD and BA from the University at Buffalo and is a partner at JC Law Group, PC, a bankruptcy law firm in San Francisco. She practices with her husband, Jeff Curl, working with individuals and small businesses to find the best solutions for their financial troubles. In addition, she's an adjunct professor at the University of San Francisco School of Law. She also teaches mindfulness and meditation to lawyers. She regularly speaks and writes about wellness, self-care, and mindfulness. She also works with lawyers and law firms on stress management, work-life balance, career transition, increasing productivity, and overall wellness. Jean is the author of the LexisNexis Guide, How to Manage Your Law Office, and her second book, The Anxious Lawyer, an 8-week guide to a joyful and satisfying law practice through mindfulness and meditation, is the basis of today's presentation. She's a regular contributor at Forbes, Lawyerist, Above the Law, Ms. JD, and Huffington Post. Please join me in welcoming Jeena.
Thanks everyone for being here. I'm just so delighted to be here with all of you. And I always like to start all of my presentations by just simply asking everyone to be here. So I don't know about you, but I often will be sitting at the office trying to write a memo or maybe get some research done. And my mind sort of drifts off, right? Thinking about, did I remember to pick up the grocery? Did I remember to buy milk? Or whatever the mind may naturally do. And of course, the reverse is true. You're at home, cooking dinner, and your mind is thinking about that brief, or, oh my goodness, did I remember to respond back to that email? So, I know all of you have had a very long day, full of activities and presentations, but I want to just take a couple of minutes to just invite everyone to simply be here. And we can always access the present moment through the breath. So I want to invite everyone to take a nice long inhale and release. Do that 2 more times, breathing in, breathing out. The biggest breath you take in all day, breathing in, breathing out. How many of you sort of notice your stress level going down, even if it's just a little bit by taking those 3 deep breaths? Yeah, like a lot of you, right? So if you remember nothing else from my presentation, you can at least take that with you. The movement crises or when you're feeling stressed, you can always connect to the breath. So I want to begin by talking about the numbers. And most of you are probably aware of these statistics and these numbers, but lawyers as a profession are not doing well in terms of our well-being. So the American Bar Association did a study last year. They surveyed 13,000 attorneys. And they found that 28% of lawyers suffer from depression, 19% suffer from chronic anxiety, 23% suffer from stress, and 21% were problem drinkers. And I always feel like, you go to these presentations and they tell you the numbers and all of these things that's wrong with our profession, but we don't get a whole lot of tools in terms of, well, so what do we do about it, right? Well, we know that there's a crisis in our profession, and what are some of the tools or what are the things that are being taught so we can actually be better lawyers? And why does any of this even matter, right? Why does our well-being actually matter in terms of lawyers? We're lawyers, like, who cares? And the reason is that it's actually part of being a competent lawyer. So, of course, competency is defined as knowing the law, right? Knowing the rule of law and being able to service your clients. But also competency in California is defined to actually mean to apply and actually maintain your mental, emotional, and physical well-being reasonably necessary for the performances of legal service. And it makes sense, right? If you're suffering from depression or chronic stress or anxiety, or if you're looking for the answers to your client's problems in the bottom of your gin and tonic, sufficient to say that you're not going to be a competent attorney. And so lawyer well-being matters because it's the key to being a competent lawyer. start the conversation by talking about stress. So how many of you experience stress on a regular basis? Okay, almost all of you. And so I think it's actually kind of helpful to talk about the definition of stress and what it means when we say we're really, really stressed. When I say I'm so stressed out, what does that actually mean? And stress can be defined as a reaction to a stimulus that disturbs our physical or mental equilibrium. And when we look at that definition, the only part of the definition that we actually have control over is, of course, the what? The reaction, right? And of course, what we often try to do is change the stimulus, right? We try to get our opposing counsel to act differently. We try to get our kids to do what we want. We try to get our spouses to do things differently, rather than recognizing that the only thing we actually do have control over is our reaction. So we're going to spend a lot of time today talking about how do we change our reaction? How do we change our reaction to all the different stimulus in our life so that we can actually have a less stressful reaction? And we can't talk about stress without talking about its BFF, which is, of course, anxiety. And anxiety is defined as the subjectively unpleasant feeling of dread over anticipated events. That's really interesting, because the subjective part means that you and I can be in the exact same situation, and I may experience a lot of anxiety, and you may be like, cool, I'm not feeling any anxiety, right? So it's kind of helpful to remember that the stress and the anxiety that we experience in our life can change over time. So people often ask me, how did you end up writing this book titled The Anxious Lawyer? Or, they'll just kind of look at the title and laugh and say, well, the non-lawyers often will, love to tell me about the stressed out lawyers that they know. And the lawyers are like, oh yeah, I can probably use this book. So back in 2009, my husband and I decided to quit our perfectly good law firm jobs to start a bankruptcy practice. And for those of you that were practicing law back then, it was a very, very different climate than it is today. So in addition to learning a completely new practice area, we were also learning how to run a business. And so, needless to say, no one ever comes to see a bankruptcy attorney with happy news. And I kind of feel like that's something they should have taught us in law school, right? Because, as lawyers, we're in the suffering business. No one ever comes to us with happy news. And does anyone have clients that come to them with happy news? I guess there are practice areas where you do, right? Yeah. And I think it'd be really great if you did represented people that won the lottery, because then your biggest problem is trying to help them spend their millions. But clients will come in and they'll tell me these sort of heartbreaking stories. So maybe a husband and wife, they'll come in and tell me that they liquidated all of their retirement savings, they took out a second mortgage on their house, they borrowed every dime they can from friends and family, maxed out all of their credit card, all in an effort to put their daughter through an experimental treatment program. And not only did the experimental treatment program fail, but now they're faced with this prospect of filing for bankruptcy. And I think part of being a lawyer, being a really good lawyer, being excellent at lawyer, means that we'll hear stories from our clients that we'll never be able to unhear. I was an assistant state attorney before I started practicing bankruptcy law, so I often think there will be images that we'll see that I'll never be able to unsee. And there's not a whole lot of tools in terms of how to help us manage the suffering of others. And so, going back to 2009, my husband and I were sort of working around the clock trying to get a business up and running, and I started to notice all of these weird physical symptoms. I had constant headaches that there was no basis for. I had stomach aches, back aches, and just this feeling of not really feeling my best. And I just felt tired all the time. I felt agitated. I felt really disengaged. And then around the same time, my boyfriend at the time decided, hey, this would be a great time for us to get married. So I always say I love being a wife so much more than I did being a fiance. So on top of learning a whole new practice area and getting a business up and running, I was planning my wedding. And as we were getting closer and closer to the wedding, I started to notice that I was losing hair. So not just a little bit of hair, but clumps and clumps of hair. So I went to a doctor, I thought, oh my gosh, I'm dying. I'm Korean American, and it's like a pretty big deal for Korean American women to be married, and I was like pretty old when I got married too, so my parents were very relieved when I finally got married. And I thought, well, now I'm dying, right? I'm finally going to make my parents happy, but now I'm dying. I went to the doctor, he ran every test, and he said, Jeena, there's nothing physically wrong with you. This is all in your head. And I said, you're kidding me, this is in my head. I never heard of such a thing. And he said, well, you might be suffering from some sort of anxiety disorder. We're not really sure why. It happens to people. And he goes, oh, here's some anti-anxiety medication and antidepressants. Give it a try and see if it helps you. And at this point, I was already taking a bunch of medication. Like, if you go to the doctor, you say, I can't sleep. They prescribe Ambien. You say, I have headaches. They prescribe all of these painkillers. And I thought, I'm starting my life, and there has to be a better way for me to manage my stress and anxiety than constantly medicating my way through it. And around the same time, I was having lunch with a friend of mine, and she's a psychotherapist, and she goes, Jeena, I'm not trying to play a therapist on you, but I think you might have an anxiety disorder. I was like, I don't have an anxiety disorder. What are you talking about? And she said, you should just check it out. There's a really great clinic at Stanford Medical School, and they're highly, highly effective for treating anxiety disorders. And so at like 3 a.m. on one of those nights where I couldn't fall asleep, I very reluctantly went on their website. There was an intake questionnaire. I filled out the intake questionnaire. A couple of days later, they called me in, and they said, ran some more diagnostics, and they said, well, you have social anxiety disorder. And I never felt as alone as I did in that moment when the therapist told me I had social anxiety disorder. I felt like such a failure because I thought, well, what lawyer has social anxiety disorder? Like, it's our job to be social, right? And part of my journey from recovering from anxiety, like really, really bad chronic anxiety, like I remember, getting up in the morning, looking at my calendar and just feeling like my stomach would just drop and I would just feel ill, like physically ill, just looking at my calendar for the day. But part of my journey into wholeness was mindfulness. I also did cognitive behavioral therapy, and after the 10-week treatment program, I thought, these are such amazing, important tools. Why aren't we teaching these tools to everyone? And of course, part of me having social anxiety disorder means that doing what I'm doing right now is like the worst thing ever, right? So I really feel like, treatment and recovery is possible. And also I think there's a sense that, as warriors, like we're supposed to be sort of invincible. We're supposed to be warriors. We're not supposed to show our feelings. We're supposed to be sort of mute and emotionless. But that, by the ability to do our job well and to actually be with clients that are in pain and suffering actually has an impact on us. So what I realized in hindsight was that I actually developed social anxiety because I didn't have any coping mechanisms for dealing with the suffering of my clients, right? And it's interesting because if you're a therapist, for example, you get lots of training on things like compassion fatigue and secondary trauma, all of these things that we'll talk about. But what type of training do we get as lawyers? Happy hour? And so I'd like to sort of start by talking about some of the unintended consequences of doing our job, starting with burnout. And burnout was interesting because I was going through a period of burnout when I was going through this transition point where we were starting a business, but I didn't realize it as burnout. And there's no blood test, where you can't go to the doctor, you can't do a blood test and say, oh, you tested positive for burnout. And it's really hard to recognize when you're in the midst of going through burnout that you're going through it. So I want to sort of highlight some of the symptoms in hopes that perhaps you'll be able to recognize it within yourself, and that if you do, it's not a personal feeling, that it just means that you just need more tools in your toolbox. So burnout is a state of chronic stress. I think that's really important to emphasize, is that chronic stress. It's not that stress is bad for us. Stress is actually really helpful for helping us to perform at our peak. But what we want to avoid is allowing the stress to continually build over time, which is what leads to burnout. And it's the sense of exhaustion, both physical and emotional exhaustion, and also detachment. And I remember I would, always sit with these clients that are going through these horrible situations, and at some point I was having these very muted responses. I remember sitting with one woman and she was just crying inconsolably, and I remember just thinking oh my gosh, please stop crying, please get out of my office. And that's still not my nature, right? Because I'm very sort of empathetic and I'm very caring, and I thought, wow, that's really interesting that I'm having that reaction. But now in hindsight, I recognize, oh, that's part of burnout. So if you're sort of realizing that you're sort of feeling more cynical or more detached, you might pause and say, am I going through burnout? And also feeling of ineffectiveness and lack of accomplishment. So no matter how much I did, I always felt like I was failing in some way, or the sense of not being good enough, or not being smart enough, it's this constant feeling of not enough. The second unintended consequence that we should be aware of as lawyers is compassion fatigue. And so compassion fatigue is the natural consequent behavior, right? And I want to emphasize that it's really natural that when you're sitting with someone that is going through some type of deep distress, that just knowing that that person is going through that deep distress actually has an impact on you. And so, if you're sitting with someone and they're going, they went through some horrible thing and you can't sort of shake it, right? You're constantly sort of thinking about that client and what that person went through. You might pause again and say, am I experiencing compassion fatigue? And these are just such human conditions. And finally, vicarious trauma. And vicarious trauma is often seen as in first responders, so ambulance workers, emergency room workers, but it's actually the re-experiencing of images of trauma of others. So if you work with a client and maybe they went through some horrible personal injury or some type of trauma, and you'll actually, and I remember doing this, where I will see sort of what the client described to me in my own mind, even though of course I didn't go through that experience. And what's interesting about vicarious trauma is that the impact on you as a person that's caring for the person is very similar to the person that actually experienced the trauma. So it's related to post-traumatic stress disorder. And as I said, therapists and other mental health professionals get tons and tons of training, right? And they actually get training on self-care and all the importance. I was talking to my friend who's a therapist, and she actually had a client who attempted suicide, and so she went to her supervisor and told her this horrible thing that had happened. And the supervisor said, oh, okay, you have to just go home, but because you can't be therapeutic with your clients, if you can't continue to see clients throughout the rest of your day because you had this horrible thing happen to you. And we don't get that, right? We don't get that benefit. No one's ever going to say to you, wow, that horrible thing happened to your client, you should go home for the rest of your day, or you go home for the rest of the week. And so when we're talking about all of sort of avoiding burnout or compassion fatigue or vicarious trauma, really what we're talking about is these two spheres. So one is the demands of our lives, right? So our clients and our personal life, so on and so forth, and then all the different resources that we have available. And there's this sweet spot where when we feel like that we have enough resources to be able to meet all the demands where it's a challenge. Or we can continue to go down this continuum of having our demands exceed our resources, which then leads to stress and burnout. And so what we want to do is actually move these two circles together, closer together, and there's only two practical ways that we can do that, right? One is to, of course, decrease demands, so actually saying no to to things, and also increasing resources. And resources is a really interesting thing because, for example, if you don't get enough sleep, anyone have that experience? Like you don't get enough sleep one night and like everything feels exponentially more difficult, right? So resources actually fluctuate depending on, how you're feeling physically, different things that are going on in your life. And we can't sort of learn what our resources are. We're starting to actually look at all the demands of our lives and saying, what am I saying yes to and what am I going to say no to without awareness. And it's actually really hard to know that you're going through a burnout or going through all of these different things without awareness. And I don't know what it is about us lawyers, but there's this tendency when something isn't going right, if something isn't going the way that we wanted to, we just double down and do the thing harder, right? Rather than stepping back and saying, oh, maybe I shouldn't be taking Ambien to fall asleep every single night. Maybe I should be stepping back and looking to see, what's going on that I'm continually having insomnia. And so awareness is actually paying attention to your mental, emotional, and physical well-being, and also being aware of all the different resources and the demands that are being placed on you, and being able to fully access all of our resources. Which gets me to mindfulness. How many of you have heard of this term called mindfulness? This is how we know we're in California, right? I did this presentation in New York and I had like 10 people raise their hands. Oops. What's happening here?
There you go.
All right, so you guys are all experts at this, so we won't spend a whole lot of time on it, but when we talk about mindfulness, really what I'm talking about is actually bringing clear-minded attention. So we can pay attention to different things with different attitudes, right? So we can pay attention to what our client is saying, and we can pay attention to it with a sense of agitation and annoyance, or we can pay attention to it with a sense of kindness and compassion. So we want to bring this sense of clear-minded attention to what is actually being perceived in the present moment. And I love this definition by Tara Brach. She says that mindfulness is genuine acceptance, seeing things clearly, and holding our experience with compassion. And I love that word, compassion. I used to kind of go, oh, I'm a lawyer, compassion. I don't do that thing. But I think as lawyers, really what we're doing is helping people. We're there to alleviate suffering. And that's really sort of the core of compassion. So compassion, and I think compassion kind of has this bad rep because people have all kinds of misconceptions about what it is. But when I talk about compassion, what I mean is that natural, innate human reaction. When we see someone in pain that is suffering, we have this sort of desire to want to help. Right? It's just really human. And not only is it important to sort of acknowledge suffering of others, but also acknowledging our own suffering. I think that was a part that I just didn't really think much about, because I would think, it's really my client that has the daughter that's going through that failed experimental treatment program, and I would sort of want to surgically remove myself from the room, but that's not really possible, right? You also have to make room for yourself as you're sitting there with your client and whatever it is they're going through. Just a lot of different words to say what we started with, which is to be here in this moment. And so it's all about sort of minding your thoughts. I often feel like there's this broken record that goes through my head, and I'll just keep thinking the same thought loop sort of over and over and over again. I was doing the dishes the other day, like a week ago. I remember the first jury trial that I ever lost, and it didn't matter that it literally happened 12 years ago. It could have been happening in that moment, right? And we all have that experience where our mind sort of gets stuck on some memory or some thought, and it's really sort of hard to unhook ourselves from that. But really, by practicing mindfulness and meditation, we can actually train our mind to sort of unhook, or at least become aware when we're doing that sort of unhelpful, unproductive thinking, so we can actually make a choice, right? So we can have a different reaction. I jokingly tell people that I started practicing mindfulness and meditation because I got tired of showering with all my clients. Not literally, of course. But so my life, back in 2009, 2010, 2011, when I was going through all of these experiences, was that I'd get up in the morning and check my phone, and I'm already in a found mood, right? Because for those of you that do federal practice, all the ACF notices release at midnight. So you wake up in the morning, it's like whatever, 6 a.m., and then, you know, all the motion for summary judgment, all the motion dismiss, and da-da-da-da. And like, you know, you're just adding so much like stress in your body. I drink a cup of black coffee, I hop in the shower, I'd be shampooing my hair, and I'd be running through my client list. Or I'll be thinking, I told my client, John, not to do that thing that I warned him against. And of course, the exact thing that I warned him against happened, and of course he's blaming me for the outcome that I warned him against. Or I'll be thinking about, you know, some case that I lost 10 years ago, or I'll be thinking about the hearing that I have 2 weeks from now. And when I took my mindfulness class, one of the exercises that the teacher had us do, which was sort of transformative, is to practice mindful showering. And he would say, you know, if you think about it, kings and queens throughout the history of the world didn't have the privilege that we get to enjoy on a daily basis. Having hot and cold water that you get to adjust perfectly to your liking, right? Having all of these luxurious products that we get to wash ourselves with. And so we don't need to actually go to vacation or to Hawaii to relax and unplug. We can actually use these little moments like showering to you know, actually pay attention and to let go of the stress of our day. And so actually finding these little moments of pauses throughout the day where we can check in with ourselves and see how we're doing. Out of curiosity, how many of you check your email first thing in the morning? Okay. How many of you use your phone as your alarm clock or sleep with your phone on your nightstand? Okay. So this is one of the challenges that I've been actually offering to every single presentation that I do. My husband and I spent New Year's of last year on a 5-day silent meditation retreat, and at the end, the teacher actually suggested that everyone in the class, get our smartphones out of the bedroom, and I was like, that is crazy. But you know, that's one of the commitments that my husband and I decided to do. We tried it for a month, so we did it for the entire month of January, and it completely changed our life. And part of it is that by having the iPhone on the nightstand, there's this tendency, especially if you are like me, you just sort of wake up in the middle of the night, there's this habitual tendency to just pick up your phone, right? Especially if you do, like I said, like federal practice, and you see all the ECF notices come in, it's really hard to fall back asleep, right? I did another presentation recently, and someone raised his hand and said, well, then how do you wake up in the morning? And I said, well, you go out and buy an alarm clock, like, you know, like we normally do. Like, how do you know, like 10 years ago before we had this little technology. So really that's sort of my the big sort of challenge to you. Go out there, you know, you can order one on Amazon for like $10 and just try it. You know, try it for a week and see if it makes a difference in your life. So I don't want you to sort of take anything that I say in this presentation just because I said it worked, right? I want you to actually go home and try it in your own life and see if it makes a difference for you. And it really was just, you know, it just made such a big difference in such an unexpected way, because then the other thing that I sort of got out of the habit of doing is waking up first thing in the morning and checking my email. And when you check your email first thing in the morning, you're allowing other people to set the priorities for your day. So now my morning routine is I get up, I meditate, I drink my coffee, and then I check my email. And so one of the ways that I was able to sort of get into the habit of meditating every single morning is that I love drinking coffee in the morning, right? Many of you love drinking coffee in the morning. I love drinking coffee in the morning. So I have a rule that says no meditation, no coffee. Right? So then that makes it easy to actually like just hook whatever new habit that you want to form to an existing habit is a really great way to form a new habit. All right, so I want to talk about stress and anxiety and how it actually shows up in our life. So let's imagine that you're sitting in your office and the phone rings and you look down on your caller ID and it's Charlie Johnson on the phone. And let's imagine that Charlie Johnson is this person that you have great difficulties with. I can use some other terms, but I won't. We'll keep things PG here. So really imagine yourself sitting in the office, the phone rings, Charlie Johnson is calling. What do you notice in your body? You feel stiff, you feel tension? Yeah. You want to notice, heart beating really fast? Yeah. Or your stomach tightens, or you start noticing that sort of tingling in your arms and legs? Yeah. So when the stress reaction is happening as part of the fight or flight response, right? I'm sure all of you have heard of it. It was great when we were cavemen and, you know, there was a saber-tooth tiger, you had to run away, but of course there's no longer a saber-toothed tiger, but our body reacts as though Charlie Johnson is a saber-toothed tiger that just jumped into your office to try to kill you. And so in these moments when you're feeling stressed and you're noticing your anxiety level going up, like what are some of the practices? Does anyone have any like practice that you do to sort of let go of the stress or to kind of get yourself back into that state of homeostasis? The what? Voicemail, yeah. I'm not going to deal with it. Yeah, exactly, yeah. So I'd like to offer you one technique that I've been practicing for many, many years, and it's incredibly effective, and I hope you'll try it in your own life and see if it makes a difference. And it's called STOP, and it stands for stop, take a breath. So let's all take a nice inhale, exhale, and then observe, right? So you might actually observe, oh, my heart's beating really fast, or I'm getting sweaty palms, or I'm getting that insta headache. And then finally proceeding mindfully. And so this technique has been incredibly helpful for me to, A, recognize when I'm feeling stressed, but also to actually diffuse it. So I might be going at like 150 miles per hour, and it may not get me back to like 30 where I want to be, but it's certainly helpful in actually reducing the stress level. But this technique only works if you can remember to practice it. Right? It's like that saying, count to 10 before you say something when you're angry. It works, but if you hold your breath and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, unlikely to have the desired effect, right? So how do we actually incorporate this into our daily life so we can remember to do this? Some very practical places where we can actually incorporate this into our life. When you're stopped at a stop sign, right? Every time you're stopped at a stop sign, just mentally go through and say stop, take a breath, observe, proceed mindfully. I also have little stickers all around my house. I have them on light switches, on my computer monitors, and other places around the house. And every time I see one, that's a reminder for me to practice the stop technique. One of the surprising places where I put it that had a sort of a really interesting impact was on my refrigerator door. Anyone have the experience of walking up to a refrigerator door, you're opening it, and you're just standing in front of the refrigerator, and you're like, why am I here? I'm not really hungry. And it actually sort of broke me out of that habitual or self-soothing eating, which I think a lot of us end up doing. So, actually being able to add these little moments of pause. The other place where I thought it really helped me was in the courtroom, surprisingly, because, and I think we all do this as lawyers, so the judge is talking, and maybe about 60% of the way through when the judge is talking to you, you sort of zone out so you can prepare your response, right? Because you don't want it to be your turn and not have anything to say. Same thing for the opposing counsel. But what I started to do was actually just fully listen to what the judge is saying and not think about what the response is going to be. And then when it was my turn, I would actually just stop for a moment and take a breath. It kind of feels like a really long time when you're in a courtroom. But actually formulate my response and then say it. And it actually really helped me in the courtroom because what I noticed was that the pace in which things moved in the courtroom, which can move very rapidly, actually started to slow down. Just because I started adding these little moments to take a breath. And also I kind of think, I don't know, this is probably might be in my head, but I also think it actually kind of gave permission for, at least my opposing counsel or other people in the room to just pause and take a breath as well. And this is really helpful when you're just in conversation with people too. I think as lawyers, we're very, we're hyper trained to listen to so we can respond rather than listen fully to actually understand what the person is saying. And so when we talk about mindfulness, what we're really talking about is our mental state. And so our mind is constantly fluctuating between these three states. And we have these moments of super focus. And in that moment, everything feels really good. Right? I'm sure all of you have had that experience, like you're maybe writing something and you're getting research done and the words are flowing out and you're just in your jam. It just feels really good. And then your brain kind of goes into this moderately distracted mode where maybe you're writing your brief and then you hop over to Facebook and then you check your phone and kind of daydream for a couple of minutes and then maybe come back to what you're doing. Or just super distracted. And it's not that we want to sort of force our mind to be in this focused state, because the mind just doesn't work like that. I mean, I wish there was just a button that says like, okay, turbocharge right now, like turbocharge, I'll do all the work right now, but the mind doesn't work that way. But actually being aware of when we're feeling really focused versus distracted, because in that moment, then you have a decision that you can make, right? You can say, wow, I'm really, really distracted. Why is it that I'm distracted? Well, maybe it's because I've been sitting for 4 hours and I haven't taken a bathroom break or a water break, and maybe I just need to get up from my desk and walk around the hallway a little bit. So actually, awareness, and this is why mindfulness is so important, because we can actually start to notice how our mind works, or we can start to notice the habitual behaviors in our life. We can start to see, oh, when A happens, I always react by doing B, and what if I try doing C or D? What if I try doing something different? Or when X happens, I always think Y. And so actually starting to get to know our minds a little bit better. And how do we do that, right? How do we actually train our mind for better performance? And it's through meditation. I'm curious, any frequent meditators in here? Frequent flyers? Okay. How about like aspirational meditators, recreational meditators? Okay, good number of you. How about like never ever? I've never ever meditated. Okay, about like fair gauge. All right, great. And so every time I do a presentation like this, especially for lawyers, and I talk about meditation, there's always this sort of like, I don't know, sort of like a resistance. Say, well, I am not going to go to an ashram. I can't sit cross-legged because my hip flexors. Or, I don't have time to meditate for hours and hours a day. Or, I don't want to chant. Or whatever these different ideas that almost like stereotypes we have about meditation. And when I talk about meditation, all I'm talking about is training the mind. It just says if you're an athlete, you would train your body for optimal performance. We can also train our mind for optimal performance. And what's really, really amazing about mindfulness and meditation and why it's such a hot topic right now is that we now have the ability to see how all of these ancient practices change your brain. So when I went through the 10-week mindfulness training course at Stanford, they actually did a brain scan before and after. And it was really wild to see my brain actually changing over these course of the 10 weeks. And so that little part of the brain in the back of your head called the amygdala is part of the fight or flight response. That part of the brain actually becomes less active with the practice of mindfulness and meditation. The gray matter in your brain increases with meditation. The prefrontal cortex, which is where all the higher level thinking and functioning happens, again, actually, you can actually sharpen these different parts of your brain just through mindfulness and meditation. And we're sort of at the infancy of actually learning how meditation and mindfulness changes the brain, right? Because we actually don't know all that much about how our brain actually works, as great as technology is. But it's really, really interesting that we can actually see that meditation and mindfulness will actually change your brain. And you don't need to meditate for hours a day to see a lot of these benefits. Sean Ecker, who's a researcher out of Harvard University, wrote a book called The Happiness Advantage. Great book, in case anyone's interested. Actually found that just 2 minutes of meditation a day for 21 days was really enough to see a lot of these impacts and these changes in your life. And when we talk about training the mind, what we're talking about is actually training our mind in these 3 different ways. So training our attention, but also training our attention so that it becomes more stable. And so we don't constantly have that mind wandering. When you're at the office, you can really be fully at the office. When you're at home, you can really fully be at home. And also control, appropriately directing your attention to what is actually happening in the moment. When you're in the courtroom, you want to be fully there. When you're hanging out with your kids, you want to be fully present to what they're saying and doing. And also efficiency, the economical use of your cognitive resources, because our cognitive resources is limited. It's not endless, right? So we want to be really thoughtful about how we allocate our time and also our mind, our cognitive resources. All right, so we're going to do a very, very short guided meditation practice. But before we do that, I want you to just pause for a moment and just see where you are in terms of your stress level. So I'm not going to ask you what your number is. That's just for your benefit. And I do all of my guided meditations in 6-minute increments for very obvious reasons. Alright, so the first thing when we meditate is to just pay attention to our posture. So for some of you, you may feel more comfortable sort of sitting at the edge of the chair, but basically you want to have both feet firmly on the ground. For others, you might feel more comfortable sort of sitting on the back of the chair and having your back supported, but finding a position that's good enough. You know, as lawyers, we're perfectionists, but good enough is perfectly fine. And when you feel ready, allow the eyes to close. And when you close the eyes, it's a very different experience than having the eyes open. So just taking a moment to notice whatever it is that you may be able to notice. Notice sounds around you. You might notice the temperature of the room. Notice the feeling of shoving against the skin, or the sensation of your feet on the floor. There's a natural tendency of the mind to judge, have preferences. And just see if you can allow whatever it is that you're experiencing in this moment to be exactly what it is, without needing to change anything or have it be different in any way. Now let's bring the attention to the breath. With a sense of curiosity, see where you can notice the movement of the breath in the body. So you might notice the breath in the nostrils, feeling the cool air as you inhale, and the warm air as you exhale. You'd also be able to notice the breath in the chest as the lungs fill with air. And then releases. You'd also be able to notice the breath in the belly as the diaphragm expands. daydreaming, worrying, or whatever the mind may naturally do. And when you notice this, simply invite yourself back to the breath, breathing in, breathing out. Just like clouds in the sky, thoughts will come and they will pass. You can learn to simply observe the mind. And returning ourselves back to the breath over and over again. Breathing in. Breathing out. And so in a moment, we'll close the practice and I'll ring the bell. But just pause for a moment and see if perhaps a word or phrase that comes to mind that you'd like to carry with you. Now let's begin to wiggle the fingers and toes and move your body in any way that feels good to you. If you haven't done so already, you can allow the eyes to open. Okay, so checking in once again, and just noticing where you are. How many of you noticed your stress level going down after that 6-minute practice? Like almost all of you, right? That's pretty amazing. Right? Almost feels like magic in a way. But yeah. So when I talk about sort of stress management, there's this sense like, oh, I don't have time for stress management. Right? I don't have time to go get a massage, or I don't have time to go on vacation, or I don't have time to do a lot of these things. But sort of reducing your stress doesn't need to take a whole lot of time, right? And I think 6 minutes a day is something that all of us can fit into our schedule. And if you really, really can't, then do two. And so one of the things that I really love about mindfulness meditation is all these different studies that are coming out. But of course, most of the studies that are out there are not on lawyers, right? They study mindfulness meditation in companies like Atma and other places, but not on lawyers. And so I really wanted to study the impact of lawyers practicing mindfulness and meditation. So last year I partnered with the National Association of Women Lawyers and Safer Shaw, and we had 850 lawyers go through an 8-week online mindfulness and meditation training program. And we had University of Western Ontario, they have a government grant from the Canadian government to actually study the impact of mindfulness and meditation. And so this is a study result that just came out, and I'm really, really thrilled to be sharing the results with you. So after an 8-week training program, job effectiveness increased by 6% for lawyers. Stress decreased by 32%. Anxiety by 30%, and depression by 29%. So I think we spend a lot of time talking about sort of the problems that the lawyers are experiencing, but not a whole lot of time talking about some of the solutions or some of the potential solutions. And of course, this study is just the first one, and we'll need to do a lot more, but I think the results are really encouraging. And I think one of the things that mindfulness and meditation really teaches us is that we're not our thoughts, and not all thoughts are facts. In my mind, I just spent a lot of time kind of going through the list of shoulds and all the ways in which I'm not good enough, smart enough. And just when we actually step back and sort of observe our mind and all the different thoughts that are going through it, you start to see, wow, like the mind is just a really sort of busy place, but a lot of it is not really helpful. The mind sort of thinks about different things and it always, of course, imagines like the worst case scenario. I know about you that, whenever I have a hearing coming up, like I'll spend just hours and hours and hours going through like 152 ways in which this thing can go off the rails. But when it does, it never goes off the rails in the exact same way that you sort of anticipated, right? So it's like, why do we, so I'm not saying like not to prepare. Of course, we should be prepared. We should practice law with excellence. But also kind of recognizing, is this thought pattern helpful or is it actually unproductive? And I love this quote by Viktor Frankl, and he says that between stimulus and response, there is a space. And that space is our power to choose our response, right? So all the things that we've been talking about, in our response lies our growth and our freedom. So I'd like to spend the last part of our presentation talking about self-care. And when I talk about self-care, and I certainly felt this way, it's like self-care and selfish. Like whenever I talk about or think about self-care, you're like, oh no, I don't have time to do that, but then I would be selfish. And there's almost this expectation, like, if you're not at work and doing work, or at home doing like whatever home stuff it is, if you do anything outside of those two like quadrants, then somehow you're like a horrible human being, or you're just failing at life. And I don't know why we sort of have that expectation of ourselves, but self-care and selfish, even though they sound similar, they're actually opposite in meaning. So if I'm being selfish, then I'm actually taking something away from you for my own gain or benefit. If I'm practicing self-care, I'm actually doing things to charge my own battery, to fill my own fuel tank, so that I can actually be more available to others. And so self-care is just all about identifying your own needs and taking little tiny steps to meet them. And self-care is only things that you can do for yourself, right? Like, no one can go to the gym for you, no one can walk around the block for you, no one can eat more kale for you. Like, the only thing that you can do for yourself. Wouldn't it be great if you can just like designate someone to eat more kale for you? It would be fantastic. And it's all about sort of doing activities that nurtures you every day. Sort of in my journey from having anxiety attacks to where I am now, what I realized was that like all the things that I used to enjoy in like college and in high school sort of all went out the window when I started practicing law. When I talk to lawyers, this seems to be a really common thing. Like I used to love to read fiction. Like I used to love to read just for the joy of it. And like graduated from law school, like no, none of that. I used to go rock climbing, stopped doing that. Did yoga, stopped doing that. Actually like having to reclaim and reincorporate some of these things into my own life. And it's all about sort of taking care of yourself and treating yourself as kindly as you would others. So actually pausing and saying, if this was my best friend, what would I tell her? What would I say to him? And so it's like, it's that saying, secure your own oxygen mask before helping others. The other quote is, you can't pour from an empty vessel. So, same thing. And so to kind of wrap things up, I have these postcards on everyone's desk, and so I want to invite you to actually write a note to yourself. And so you can kind of pause and think about, and this is such a great time to do it, right? Because we're at the end of the year, like New Year's is just around the corner. And just pausing for a moment and just asking yourself, what am I doing for self-care? Is there some sort of commitment that you'd like to make in terms of going forward? This could be like a New Year's resolution or just any type of simple practice that you'd like to incorporate into your life, and you're going to address it to yourself. And what I'll do is I will collect it, and sometime in the future, I will mail these back to you. And it's such an interesting and fun exercise to do, to get a note from your future self. And if you like my guided meditation, like the one that we did in here, you can write your email address on the bottom, and I will email you my 6-minute guided meditation. And so the other day I did one of these practices for first-year associates, and someone asked me which side you put your address on. So for those of you that never sold out a postcard, the part that has the lines on it is where you put your address, and the blank side is where you write your message to yourself. So, and you can just leave them on your desk, and I'll walk around and collect it. And when you're thinking about this, really think about it in terms of little tiny bite-sized practices, right? Really think about it in terms of 0.1 hour. Like, what can you do in 6 minutes a day of all the hundreds and hundreds of hours that you dedicate to others throughout the year? Like, won't you deserve to have 0.1 hour for yourself? And not only just 0.1 hour, but actually committing to do whatever the practice is, whatever the thing is, right? So it might be during lunch break, I'm gonna not eat lunch at my desk, or I'm at least going to turn off my computer when I'm eating lunch, or I'm gonna listen to my favorite song, or I'm going to go for a walk around the block, or whatever it might be, but actually commit to doing it for 8 weeks, right? Sometimes I'll have lawyers and they'll tell me like, I tried doing that thing, meditation once, it just didn't work for me. I'm like, what do you mean? So I tried it once, and it's like nothing happened. And I go, no, it's like going to the gym once and saying I quit because I don't have the perfect body. Like, it takes practice. So actually, practicing for 8 weeks, I did the math for you, we're lawyers. 336 minutes is less than 6 hours, right? And so this is such a wonderful time to actually kind of pause and reflect on, where things are right now, and just see, like, are there little tiny tweaks or little tiny adjustments that you'd like to make for your own well-being, right? For your own mental, physical, emotional, spiritual well-being. And I'll close with this. If not now, then when? I don't know that there's ever a promise that we'll be able to take time for ourselves whenever when we retire, and so that's guaranteed to us somehow. So yeah, really kind of pausing and thinking about our own well-being, because we can only be the best lawyer, best spouse, best friend, sister, brother, so on and so forth possible if we're well. And it's so important for us to actually pause and pay attention to our well-being. My email address is up there, hello@jeenacho.com. It's spelled with 2 E's. I'm really happy if you drop me an email with any questions. I'll also stick around and answer any questions that you may have. And if we might have time for a couple of questions, maybe. Any questions? Any comments? Yeah.
What's the difference between meditation and taking a nap?
When we meditate, what we're doing is actually bringing our attention to some object of attention. So it might be the breath, just like we did in the practice here. What we're doing is training our mind to focus on a singular thing. So you can focus on sound, you can notice different physical sensations. Some people use a mantra. So it's different than sleeping or taking a nap. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
Some recommendations for strategies for defending your time to yourself to meditate. I understand like carving out the time, saying, listen, I'm going to do this before I have my coffee every morning. But then, for instance, in my house, it's nonstop 6-year-old, 3-year-old chaos. And just defending that time for yourself.
I totally sympathize, and it's really, really hard. And I think a part of it is actually just like saying to your kids, like, this is like like mom, and I'm going to practice self-care, and this is just something that mom does, and this is just something that I do, and it also just sort of becomes part of their routine. Because I think a lot of it just has to do with feeling guilty, right? It's like, oh, I can't take 6 minutes because I really have to pour all of my attention to my kids. So yeah, and actually saying like, well, from whatever, 8 till 8:05, like mommy's gonna go into her room and meditate. And I think it's also a great way to sort of model healthy behaviors for your kids and also self-care for your kids. Yeah. All right, so I want to thank everyone